Okay, so let's just dive right in. What if I told you that a dense, 1,400-year-old manuscript held a practical guide to unlocking, well, what we might call superhuman potential? We're digging into a text from a 7th century saint, Maximus the Confessor, and buried inside is this absolutely radical and, surprisingly modern idea about what a human being is truly capable of becoming.
At its core, the text asks this really provocative question. And we're not talking about superpowers, flying or anything like that. We're talking about transcending our ordinary, natural limitations, our biology, our history, even our own fragmented minds, to reach a genuinely higher state of being.
All right, so here's our game plan for unpacking this. First, we'll look at the radical invitation the text opens with. Then we're going to try and solve the riddle of this figure named Melchizedek. After that, we'll map out the actual path, look at the mental engine that drives the whole thing, and then finally we'll bring it all back home and ask what this ancient idea of ascent could mean for us today.
So, first things first, who is this journey for? I mean, you'd think a 7th century mystical text would be describing a path that's, reserved for a handful of spiritual elites. But that's the first big surprise here. That's not the case at all. This is presented as an open call, a path that's available to anyone who wants to walk it.
And the text is incredibly direct about it. It says, flat out, anyone who wishes can do this. You're not prevented. And the key, the real secret sauce, is right there in that last phrase. You do it by imitating their way of life. So this isn't something you're born into. It's a path of practice, of action. So, the text invites us to become a Melchizedek. But who or what is that exactly? In this whole framework, Melchizedek isn't just some dusty historical figure. He is the archetype of the destination. He's the blueprint for the ultimate goal of this entire transformation.
The text describes Melchizedek as being without father or mother or genealogy. Now that sounds pretty weird, right? But it's not meant to be literal. It's actually a powerful metaphor for someone who has so completely transcended their given circumstances, their genetics, their family history, their culture, that those things just don't define them anymore. They've become defined by something higher, by grace itself.
So how does this happen? How is this divine likeness actually achieved? Well, it's not a lottery ticket, it's not an accident of birth. The source is crystal clear. It comes down to two things: the practice of virtue, which is really just about aligning your actions with the higher good, and something it calls unwavering true contemplation, which is a really profound state of mental focus.
And this right here brings us to what might be the single most mind-bending idea in the entire text. The idea that a person can become, by grace, what the giver of grace is by nature. Think about that. In other words, you're not just observing some higher reality from a distance, you start to participate in it. You begin to actually embody it.
So the main takeaway here is this: Melchizedek is the proof of concept. He represents the fully realized human potential that the rest of this path is designed to lead you toward. He is the finish line.
Okay, so if Melchizedek is the destination, what's the map? How do you get there? Well, the text lays out a really clear inner path, breaking the journey down into two very distinct stages.
And these stages are represented by two more archetypes you probably know: Abraham and Moses. The first step is a departure, kind of like Abraham leaving his homeland. The second step is an internal battle, like Moses confronting the Pharaoh.
Let's break that down a little. The Abraham stage, that's all about a kind of external detachment. It means leaving the world that's defined only by your five senses and what the text calls the fleshly disposition. Then, once you've done that, you get to the Moses stage. And this is the internal struggle. This is about fighting the inner Pharaoh, which is this amazing metaphor for the tyrannical rule of your own reactive passions, your compulsions, and all those distracting thoughts.
So you can really see these two movements clearly. First, there's Abraham's journey. It's about stepping away from the external world that so often traps us. Then there's Moses' struggle, which is about conquering that internal chaos, that reign of the passions, to create order inside your own mind. You leave, then you fight.
So we have our destination and we have our map. But what's the engine? What's the fuel that actually powers this whole transformation from a scattered self into a unified being? Well, it all comes down to the practice of contemplation.
According to this text, the fundamental problem of the human condition is something called multiplicity. Basically, our minds are naturally scattered. And I mean, think about your own day-to-day experience, right? Your attention is constantly fragmented, pulled in 100 different directions by notifications, memories, worries, desires. We are literally scattered across time and space in our own heads. So what's the antidote to this scattered state? It's contemplation. The text calls it a simple movement of the intellect, which is just the act of intentionally gathering up all those fragmented pieces of your attention and bringing them back to one single, stable, unified center.
The goal, then, is unity, and not just as a fleeting feeling, but as a new baseline for your life. A mind that is whole, integrated, and focused. A mind that is no longer a victim of its own fragmentation, but is instead this powerful, unified instrument for perceiving reality.
And the text offers this just beautiful metaphor for what happens next. The unified soul, free from all the distortions of ego and passion, becomes like the clearest of mirrors. It doesn't create its own light, but it can now perfectly reflect the truth of reality, the divine, without all the smudges and cracks of a scattered mind.
Okay, so this is all absolutely fascinating as a piece of 7th century spiritual psychology. But what does it have to do with our lives today? Right now? Well, it turns out if we just translate the concepts a little, we find a really powerful framework for personal growth.
You can really see this ancient path as a blueprint for very modern challenges. Fighting the inner pharaoh? I mean, that's just a fantastic way of describing the work of overcoming our self-limiting beliefs. Leaving the land? That sounds a lot like detaching from the constant need for external validation, for likes and shares. And the practice of contemplation? That's a form of radical focus, a deep training of our attention that we need now more than ever.
So the really crucial takeaway is this. We can read this ancient text not just as theology, but as a sophisticated, practical manual for human transformation. It's a guide to integrating a scattered self and unlocking a potential that, for most of us, lies totally dormant. And that leaves us with one final thought. Maximus the Confessor laid out this incredible map showing what a human being could become. He described a path of ascent. So the final question isn't a historical one, it's a personal one. It's for you. Who are you becoming?